name's Dr. Joseph Toscano. I'm the convener of the Tunnerminnerwait Maulboyheenner Commemoration Committee. I'm going to take you down on a short walk down to the monument. We're at the corner of Franklin and Victoria Street in Melbourne, just across the road from the Melbourne City Jail, RMIT and Trades Hall. Now this is a significant site because on the 20th of January 1842, two Indigenous Freedom Fighters from Tasmania, Tunnerminnerwait Maulboyheenner, were publicly executed on this spot. After a 12-year struggle, we got a monument erected to them, the first significant monument to the frontier wars in any major capital city in this country. 176 years after the execution, 175 years after the execution. It was built in 2016. Now, around the monument is a healing garden, plants from both their original sites in Tasmania, northwest Tasmania and central Tasmania were brought here, as well as plants from the Mornington Peninsula. These are healing plants used by Indigenous communities to heal physical and psychological ailments. Inside, you'll find there's a story of these men. This monument was designed after a long process. Two Indigenous artists were finally picked for it. We use the words Tunnerminnerwait Maulboyheenner because that's their traditional names. We wanted to use their traditional names, although they had European names. They were the survivors of the 30-year war in Tasmania. 76 survivors, 17 were brought to Victoria in 1839 to civilise the Victorian blacks. Their words, not mine. This is the monument to them. It's a swing. It has two chains. It plays on the idea of a community festival, because this was a public execution. Over a quarter of Melbourne's population turned up for the execution. There were ice cream sellers, newspaper sellers. Great day, except for Tunnerminnerwait Maulboyheenner. So it plays on that idea of a community festival, having a swing, but at the same time you've got two coffins for Tunnerminnerwait Maulboyheenner, and you've got the chains which represent the ropes they were hung with. At the back you'll notice some old newspaper stands. In the old days when they used to sell newspapers on the streets, the newspaper boy or girl would have newspapers on a little stand and take out and sell them. The story, their story, is in those newspaper stands. So if you bring your family here, have a look at the monument, have a look at the story. Today I'm going to read out a piece I wrote about 12 years ago, which actually highlighted what had happened. This was a forgotten history, history that people knew nothing about, and it was through the efforts of the Tunnerminnerwait Maulboyheenner Commemoration Committee that it is now a significant part of Melbourne history. So I'll read it out. If you're bored and listless and young or old and frail, it'll take about 70 minutes, so I don't blame you if you don't listen. You can always go to the website Tunnermaul, Tunner, Maul, Maul.org, and you can actually read it there if you can't stand 70 minutes of YouTube. All the best. You've noticed I've got my glasses on. I'm getting a bit elderly. I'm 67, so I need them to read. The Tunnerminnerwait Maulboyheenner Saga. What is in a name? Tunnerminnerwait, the son of Boyheenner, was born on Robins Island, Tasmania in 1812. He was known as Pivet, Napoleon, Jack of Cape Grim and Tunnerminnerwait. When he was born, European sealers had been hunting elephant seals and kangaroos on Robins Island in northwest Tasmania for the last 8 years. By the time he had turned 13, nearly all the elephant seals and kangaroos on the island had been wiped out. 1 year later, the Tasmanian Land Company moved on to the Northwest Tribes land, establishing sheep stations at Circular Head and Cape Grim. On the 27th of November 1827, an Aboriginal came across sheep and several shepherds at Cape Grim. The meeting ended in disaster for the Northwest Tribes when one Aboriginal man was shot dead and one shepherd was wounded in the scuffle that developed when the shepherds attempted to entice the Aboriginal women into their huts. A few days later, the Aborigines drove a mob of sheep to their deaths over the cliffs at Victory Hill in revenge for the Aboriginal man's death. 6 weeks later, the shepherds ambushed a group of Aborigines mutton birding, killing 30 men, women and children. they threw their bodies over the same cliffs, giving Cape Grim its name. The Northwest tribes continued to suffer at the hands of the sealers and shepherds. Aboriginal men were shot on sight, women were kidnapped and taken to the sealers' camps on Kangaroo Island in southern Victoria, where they were forced into sexual servitude. Within 3 years of white colonisation, only 60 of the 500 members of the Northwest tribe had survived the onslaught. In June 1830, George Augustus Robertson, the Chief Protector of Aborigines in Tasmania, reached Northwest Tasmania. He was attempting to round up the remnants of the free tribes of Tasmania and resettle them on an island off the north coast to prevent them from being exterminated. The only Aborigines in Northwest Tasmania who he came into contact with were 6 abducted women and 1 abducted man, an 18-year-old youth who had been named Jack of Cape Grim. He forced the sealers to give up the Northwest tribal Aborigines by threatening to prosecute them for shooting their husbands. Robertson persuaded the Aborigines to come with him, promising they would be able to return to their tribal lands. Tunnerminnerwait escaped from Robertson a few months after his initial capture because he realised he had no intention of returning him to Robins Island. He was recaptured by Robertson soon after and became part of the group that accompanied Robertson in the search for the Big River people between October 1830 to January 1831. Tunnerminnerwait developed a long and complex relationship with Robertson and held Tunnerminnerwait in high regard and spoke of him as an exceedingly willing and industrious young man who was stout and well made, of good temper, and performed his work equal to any white man. Maulboyheenner, Robert Smallboy, Jemmy, Timmy, Chinny, Jimmy, Robert of Ben Lomond and Bob were some of the European names Maulboyheenner was known as. Maulboyheenner came from one of the inland tribes that had lived on the Ben Lomond highlands. He came into contact with Robertson as a relatively young man, and in early 1830 accompanied him, his party of white assistants, and the 5 survivors of the Bruny Island people, Wurraday, his 2 sons Peter and David Bruni, and 2 young girls, Dre and Paggerly, on the difficult journey along the west coast to help persuade the west coast guerrilla bands to lay down their arms and move to Flinders Island. Maulboyheenner was also part of Governor Arthur's infamous Black Line campaign that was conducted later that year to drive Tasmanian Aborigines away from the settled areas. Maulboyheenner joined the dynamic leader of the Stony Creek tribe, Kanahogena Umara and Tunnerminnerwait in October 1831 to find the Big River tribe and force them to join Robertson's group. In 1832, Maulboyheenner accompanied Robertson on his second foray down the west coast. In 1835, 32 years after colonisation began, Robertson boasted the entire Tasmanian Aboriginal population had been removed to Flinders Island. He received a reward of £1,000 for his services to the government. The 33-year war between the European colonisers and the Tasmanian Aborigines was finally over. Over 10,000 Aborigines had lived in Tasmania when Europeans first colonised Tasmania in 1803. By 1835, less than 350 had survived the Holocaust. 3/4 of those who were transferred to Flinders Island died within 3 years. Only 89 Tasmanian Aborigines were left when Robertson decided to offer his services to the New South Wales government. The Tasmanian government, keen to see the back of the last Tasmanian, offered to bankroll his generous offer as long as he was allowed to take all the Tasmanian Aborigines that had survived the European Holocaust to the mainland. Move them out! George Augustus Robertson had big plans for himself and his Aborigines. He never had any intention of returning the survivors of the 33-year Holocaust back to their tribal lands. Robertson wanted to use his domesticated Aborigines to civilise the mainland blacks. Even before John Batman set up his illegal settlement at Port Phillip Bay, the governor of Van Diemen's Land, Sir George Arthur, wrote on the 27th of September 1835 to the Colonial Office in England, informing them that Robertson was willing to take his Aborigines from Flinders Island to to the newly established settlement at Portland Bay on the Australian mainland to open a friendly communication with the natives there. The Tasmanian authorities, keen to deport the last of the Tasmanian Aborigines, even offered to pay for their maintenance in New Holland. The New South Wales authorities strongly opposed the deportation of the Tasmanian Aborigines to the Australian mainland, although the British Colonial Office was in favour of the move. Governor Arthur highlighted the deportation of the last surviving Tasmanian Aborigines island had greatly increased the value of Crown land in Tasmania, and he believed Robertson could, using the same tactics he used in Tasmania, do the same for the value of Crown land on the mainland. A British House of Commons Select Committee in 1837 recommended that a protector of Aborigines be appointed at Port Phillip because of the numerous reports of atrocities that would be committed by the new settlers against the Aboriginal population. Governor Arthur and the new Tasmanian Governor Franklin lobbied to have Robertson take up the post of Chief Protector at Port Phillip. Governor Franklin highlighted in August 1838 that life would be safer for the Port Phillip settlers if they allowed Robertson to bring across the Tasmanian Aboriginal survivors from Flinders Island to Port Phillip because of the mixing of domesticated blacks with the less civilised tribes at Port Phillip would make them less dangerous. He repeated Governor Arthur's offer to pay for their upkeep at Port Phillip. A New South Wales Legislative Council committee headed by the Anglican Archbishop of Australia claimed in 1838 it would be a serious mistake to let the Tasmanian Aborigines on the mainland because of the risk of violence, rape and murder. The committee was concerned the lessons Tasmanian Aborigines had learnt in their 33-year struggle against the white colonisers would encourage the local Aborigines to do the same fierce and hostile deportment towards the settlers. The Legislative Council Committee suggested that if the Tasmanian Aborigines were civilised, they should be set free, not deported to the mainland. On the 12th of December 1838, Robertson was appointed Chief Protector of Aborigines at Port Phillip. He was allowed to bring one family of Tasmanian Aborigines with him to act as his personal attendants. The move. Sir George Gipps, the Governor of New South Wales, made it clear to the Colonial Office in England that he did not support Robertson's plan to bring across the Tasmanian Aborigines to Port Phillip. He only allowed Robertson to bring one family with him to act as his personal attendants. Robertson, full of his own self-importance, brought 16 of the surviving 89 Tasmanian Aborigines with him to Port Phillip. Governor Gibbs informed Robertson that the New South Wales government could only provide rations for a family of 4. Robertson and the 16 Aborigines from Flinders Island arrived at Port Phillip in January 1839. He intended to use the Tasmanian Aborigines as mediators and educators. Even a man as hardened as Robertson was shocked by the disease, destitution and wretchedness displayed by the Port Phillip Aborigines who were living on the outskirts of Melbourne. Robertson wanted Victorian Aborigines to be able to continue to live on government-owned remnants of land in the districts they had traditionally lived on. The Chief Protector introduced the Tasmanian Aborigines to the Yarra tribes almost as soon as he arrived. He noted in his diary, their reception was of the utmost friendly character. Jane Dredge, William Thomas, Edward Parker and Charles C. Wright came to Australia from England to take up their positions as assistant protectors. The assistant protectors set up their tents on an old Aboriginal camping ground on the south of the Yarra. Robertsons moved into an abandoned police hut and the Tasmanian Aborigines had to build grass shelters for themselves. The party organised a great feast in February 1839 at the site of the current Botanic Gardens, to which all the Port Phillip Aborigines and Melbourne's townfolk were invited. Beef, mutton and bread were supplied to everyone. The Aborigines initially refused to eat the food prepared for them because they were concerned they would be poisoned, as poison was liberally being used by the squatters to solve their Aboriginal problem. Games and competitions were held and fireworks were set off to show the Port Phillip Aborigines that the protectors had come with good intentions. The Aborigines mistakenly assumed they would be supplied with free rations and goods to compensate them for the loss of their lands. Governor Gibbs, concerned about the cost involved, complained to the Colonial Office. He severely limited the rations that could be given to Aborigines after October 1839. Assistant protectors deployed. George Augustus Robertson had 4 assistant protectors to help him ameliorate the lot of local tribes in the face of introduced disease, the ravages of alcohol and tribal warfare, interracial massacres and poisonings. The Chief Protector of Aborigines was expected to do his job despite overt hostility from white settlers and the press, and very little financial support from the Sydney Treasury. When Robertson arrived with 16 Aborigines from Flinders Island, no government supplies were allocated to the Aborigines. Some months after their arrival, Superintendent Latrobe provided rations for 4 of them. Tasmanian Aborigines were expected to look after themselves. Robertson's 4 assistants had been appointed by the British Colonial Office. None had been to Australia before. Charles Dredge, Edward Parker and William Thomas were Methodist school teachers. The 4th assistant, Charles Seabright, was a former military officer who had been forced to sell his military office to pay off his gambling debts. On the 26th of March 1839, after the new assistant protectors had familiarised themselves with their positions, they were allocated areas of responsibility by Robertson. Dredge was sent to North East Victoria, Parker to the North West Victoria, Seabright to the Western Districts, and Thomas was responsible for Melbourne and Western Port. Seabright was shocked to find that on his first journey to the Western Districts, 2 stations he visited had Aboriginal skulls placed over the doors as a warning to any Aborigines who came to the station. Robertson was more interested in creating an empire for himself than taking an interest in the plight of the Aborigines he was employed to protect. Faced with hundreds of Aborigines camped around Melbourne, many of them dying from typhus fever, dysentery, syphilis, pneumonia, the cold and famine. Robertson lost interest in the plight of the 16 Aborigines he brought across with him from Flinders Island. Some were loaned out to work with Robertson's sons, others were expected to look after themselves. On the 2nd of October 1840, the New South Wales Governor released Robertson from any responsibility for the Tasmanian Aborigines he had brought to Port Phillip. The Myall Creek Massacre. In June 1838, at Myall Creek, north of Sydney, 28 Aborigines, mainly women and children, were tied up and hacked to pieces with swords. The dismembered bodies were partially burnt. 7 assigned convicts were brought to trial for the massacre. They were acquitted by a jury after 15 minutes discussion. The Anti-Slavery Society in England and the Aborigines Protection Society in London were disgusted by the massacre, the trial and the comments made by jurors involved in the trial. I look on the blacks as a set of monkeys, and the earlier they are exterminated from the face of the earth, the better. That was the comment by the jurors. An active Aborigines Protection Society in London and a sympathetic colonial administration in England forced New South Wales Governor Gibbs to hold a retrial. After the second trial, the assigned convicts working as shepherds were found guilty. They were hung soon after the second trial on the 18th of December 1838. Interestingly, their masters, the squatters who ordered the massacre, were never questioned, charged or brought to trial for ordering the massacre. The 7 assigned convicts were executed to keep the Colonial Office off the New South Wales government's back. In May 1839, Gibbs, the New South Wales Governor, who was also responsible for the newly established Port Phillip settlement, declared in the Government Gazette he wanted to bring the settlers and the Aborigines to equal and indiscriminate justice. The hanging of 7 assigned convicts in Sydney in late 1838 and Governor Gibbs' announcement 5 months later caused consternation among the Port Phillip settlers. The Port Phillip press thundered against pseudo-philanthropists who didn't know what they were talking about. The open warfare that had been occurring between Aborigines and squatters in the Port Phillip region and the rest of Victoria became a secret, covert war of destruction almost overnight. Nobody talked about what was happening. Bodies of Aborigines with gunshot wounds were dismembered and burnt. Robertson's assistant protectors were shunned. William Thomas, the assistant protector for the Melbourne region, reported the squatters and their shepherds were incensed about the Sydney hangings. Thomas reported that poisoning had become the favourite weapon of a coloniser, and the blacks stopped accepting
flour, milk and bread from the squatters because of their fear of poison. The local Aborigines now found themselves in an impossible situation, driven from their lands at the point of a gun, concerned about the very real possibility, provisions though that were being offered to them by squatters and assistant protectors alike could be poisoned, and unable to hunt and gather food on their traditional lands, many died of starvation. Those like Tunnerminnerwait and Gingin, who stole potatoes grown in South Yarra or killed sheep to survive, were treated as criminals. The lucky ones like Tunnerminnerwait and Gingin were arrested. The unlucky ones were legally hunted down and slaughtered. To be forewarned is to be forearmed. The Van Diemen's Land's Aborigines were of little use to the Chief Protector Robertson. Maulboyheenner and Walter Arthur were sent to assist white explorers trek to South Australia. Wurraday and a few of the older men were sent to work on Robertson's son's properties. He found the women hard to handle. They absconded on a number of occasions and had to be recaptured by Robertson. In August 1840, Superintendent Latrobe, concerned about Robertson's capacity to deal with the local Aborigines, asked the New South Wales Governor to relieve him of responsibility for the Van Diemen's Land's natives. He was officially relieved of any responsibility for their care on the 2nd of October 1840. Left to their own devices, they tended to gravitate to the Western Port region, where Thomas, the Assistant Protector of the Melbourne region, had been sent to set up a blacks camp to distribute rations to encourage the hundreds of blacks that were camped around the settlement in Melbourne to move away from Melbourne. It is known that Isaac, one of the 16 Van Diemen's Land's blacks, was in early 1841 going round the Western Port region telling the settlers to arm themselves as 5 black fellows were coming down to cause mischief. On the pretext they were going to join Thomas's camp, Tunnerminnerwait Maulboyheenner, Birraranga, Truganini and Planobina, 5 of the original party of 16, vanished into the Western Port bush by August 1841.